Most people think time is like a river that flows swift and sure in one direction. But I have seen the face of time, and I can tell you, they are wrong. Time is an ocean in a storm. You may wonder who I really am, and why I say this. Come, and I will tell you a tale like none you have ever heard.
Now, before we get into this, I've covered the previous 2 games in the series. If I remember to, there should be links to these videos somewhere on the screen. If not, it's probably in the description. Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones is a 2005 action-adventure game developed by Ubisoft Montreal and Ubisoft Casablanca. It was published by Ubisoft as well. It's an action-adventure game combining acrobatic parkour, sword swinging and time manipulation. It's the final chapter of the Sands of Time trilogy, but it's not the last game to be set in the continuity. The story follows the prince as he returns to his home in Babylon, only to find that his actions in the second game have undone the events from the first. The villainous vizier is back from the dead and absorbs the Sands of Time, which transforms him into an immortal god of time. Now, the prince must work together with his past love Farah to defeat the vizier once and for all, while also struggling against his own dark prince persona, which is slowly corrupting him, and at parts taking over his body, giving him extra abilities in both combat and movement. The game combines the excellent storytelling of the Sands of Time with the updated combat systems of Warrior Within, creating what many players consider the superior game in the trilogy. The story matches this fast-paced gameplay in a similar route to previous titles, with various sections included that change the loop for the better, from on-rails sections to unique boss fights, and some returning friends, so let's get into it. Before we even started playing, I had to lock some FPS settings during the game, or bits of the parkour started to bug out, columns falling early or jumps just missing where they were meant to. I did this through Nvidia's control panel and I set the max FPS to 50 frames per second for most of the game. When you reach a level called Mid Tower, towards the end you'll have to set it to 30. It was quite frustrating finding this out during gameplay, but if I'd known from the start I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. It's a symptom of it not being made for new systems, and the game came out in 2005. To focus in on the gameplay, there's 2 overlapping gameplay loops that play a bit tighter than they did in previous titles. Your acrobatic moving about the environment, scaling walls, ledges and columns, jumping off of shutters to move around these large open areas, sometimes containing sections you need to move with levers or boxes you need to drag. A few of these areas are puzzle-like, but for the most part the paths are very clear and direct. It feels cool to be so acrobatic, though the set path nature of it all might be seen as limiting to some players. I had a lot of fun with it, and you can combine this with moving around areas for combat to either attack off the walls or sneak around for stealth kills, which are new to this game. Those areas had a bit more choice in how you tackle them as well. The second loop is the combat, which includes sword swinging, parrying, and a bit more focus on dodging and evasion than in previous titles. You have certain sections where you can stealth kill your enemies in these cool cinematic fatalities, or you just blast through. Combat's mostly optional. You have access to the Dagger of Time, so you can slow down time, rewind time, or do a big blast AoE to kill your enemies. The rewind system's fairly useful if you take too many hits, or if you absolutely flub some of the acrobatics. You don't need to fall to your death and go back a checkpoint because you can just rewind. The combat includes some throws and a sidearm system where you can steal your opponent's weapons to change up your combos. The combat's very fun, and unlike Sands of Time, again mostly optional, where some sections you could just run up the walls and avoid fighting your enemies if you get bored of it. They included some unique boss fights in this title which definitely mix things up in the same vein as Warrior Within, but they were heavily expanded upon. At various sections of the story, you'll slip into Dark Prince form where your combat abilities are drastically improved. You have all these acrobatic moves you can do with an extendable chain to get around. The trade-off is your health's constantly draining unless you gather more Sands of Time to restore it. This created a good bit of pressure, but in certain areas I felt the timing wasn't really balanced. In that if you did everything perfect with acrobatics and parkour, your health would run out before the section ended if you made, a single mistake. Overall, the Dark Prince sections tend to be quite memorable and some of the best sections of the game for me, just with that in mind. There's also some unique on-rail sections where you drive a chariot or a giant monster, and those were quite fun too. Throughout all of this, you have some good narration from a disembodied narrator and discussion from the prince, his allies, and his little dark passenger in his head. The gameplay serves as a really good vehicle for delivering the story and adjusting pacing where needed. I think it's really fun and engaging, and even if some sections were rough. Graphics wise, the game came out in 2005, so bear that in mind. I do feel they reuse or modify some of the older assets from previous titles a little bit too much. Graphics haven't really improved since Warrior Within, though there's a greater variety in the area designs and the enemies you can encounter. It looks really nice, but when comparing it to the games it's a sequel to, I think it comes up slightly lacking. Some of the added special effects are a little bit too cranked up for me. It didn't put me off the game. It's not especially ugly, but in some areas they look really cool. In other areas, not so much. The in-engine cutscenes are really nice, but the pre-gen cutscenes look a bit dated now, however. There seems to be greater variety in the soundtrack than previous titles, which wasn't hard when you compare it to Warrior Within that had only one combat song. And all the acrobatics have some nice sound effects when you're running, jumping and climbing. It scratches an area of my brain where I found it really satisfying. You know, all these different clanks and bangs and knocks as you climb up the scenery. You could see they might not have prioritised the graphics in the budget though.
Shall I continue my story from here?
Story-wise, the game is a direct sequel to Warrior Within, with references to the last two games throughout. You can play it without playing these games, but you'll be missing a lot in terms of callbacks, some of the narrative weighting put behind some characters. The story is very good, with the whole do you pursue your vengeance or risk of losing yourself theme to it that's quite popular in the likes of Berserk and Vinland Saga and those sort of popular things.
To conquer a city is one thing, but to do so with such a violence and cruelty is something else entirely. I will return every blow he has landed against my kingdom.
We are close, Prince. So close. Let us make him suffer.
The Prince of Persia has returned from the Island of Time to Babylon, but so too has the evil Vizier returned. The events of the first game never happened, so he didn't really get. They do a very good job pulling that storytelling from Sands of Time, and it feels like you're in some ancient saga with good character development and a very storyteller style of narration. We're going to get into it in the next section, so expect further spoilers from there. Hey guys, I just wanted to say a huge thanks for 10 seconds. At the time of recording, we've hit over 3,000 channel views and 50 subs, which is something I didn't really imagine when I started in February. If you haven't already, any interaction would help me not only tailor my content better, but also do well in the algorithm. A like, comment or sub would mean the world to me. Thanks, and let's get back to Two Thrones.
Some believed when the prince journeyed to the Island of Time to escape death that he returned alone. The amulet destroyed, the Dahaka appeased, the Empress dead. The prince was free at last. But this is not how it happened. The truth is that he chose to save me from my destiny. In doing so, he set me free. And doomed us all.
We're given an opening narration by Kaileena, the Empress of Time we'd saved in the last game. She gives us a bit of a summary of Warrior Within, that we travelled there to escape the Dahaka chasing us, and that we saved the Empress and began our journey home after. The two seem to have grown close to each other, with Kaileena mentioning something's wrong with the timeline, as we see Babylon in front view, seemingly under attack and definitely not how we left it. The boat comes under fire and is eventually destroyed as we hit the shore in a similar fashion to the last game. The city's under attack, with Kaileena being kidnapped across the shore from us, and our first objective is put pretty front and centre. We have to get her back. She narrates as we do, shedding light on the extent of the damage Babylon's been exposed to, and just really giving us a setup to the city that's in shambles. We see combat going along in the background that complements this. The first section of crawling amongst the ruins of the dock serves as a brief tutorial to the movement system in the game, with us finding our own path up and out of the ruins. We get one little fun cutscene as we get our first weapon and an introduction to the new speed kill stealth system in the game.
Why is it that every time disaster strikes, I find myself without a proper blade? Still, it's better than nothing.
In the last game, we were a warrior invading the Island of Time, whereas this time, we're slinking about an occupied city, evading capture, and trying to rescue Kaileena. The system reflects this, we're stealthier. The prince advances through the docks with some brief bits of combat and us essentially following the kidnapper's path. They're using proper doors, whereas we have to climb about the place, and the combat also feels very Warrior Within, with the animation seemingly stripped from the last game. There's this one section that highlights just how bad Babylon has it, where we can see the cityscape engulfed in flame and covered in bandits. There's some fun acrobatics throughout the city streets as the prince recalls his memories of the city. Really, nothing too big story-wise happens until we get to the palace as we sneak about the city, being hunted down by the invaders. Now the city's full of guards and various static trap defences we need to navigate to get here, and we don't have the ability to rewind time yet. When we get deeper into the city, Kaileena's narration tells us to keep an ear out to what the prince overhears there.
Secrets. What we discovered was abandoned. Its guardians are assassins. Strange tales adorned its walls, which spoke of an empress of time. But of this enigmatic creature, there was no trace.
Essentially, a man's voice gives us a recollection of the events of Sands of Time, with the hourglass empty. The man saw his life was close, but life eternal could be achieved if he could get hold of the Sands of Time. The dagger of time drew the man to Babylon, it actually whispered to him, and he defeated the Maharaja nearby and used the Maharaja's army to attack Babylon. His chance at immortality was somewhere within.
Recklessly, the prince drew his weapon and charged forward, intending to rescue me. It was as if he had learned nothing from his past adventures. Or perhaps he'd simply forgotten, made blind and deaf by fear and rage.
The Vizier!
Ah, you must be the Prince of Persia. Come home at last. Too late, I'm afraid. I believe I have something of yours.
No! Kaileena!
After the Vizier kills Melina, his supposed immortality scheme comes into effect, corrupting his lieutenants and damaging the prince somewhat. We have the Dagger of Time now, and the main concern is dispatching the man responsible for this carnage. With the dagger we can rewind time to avoid death, and we're forced to run through the crumbling palace as it's the only path directly forward. This obviously takes a little while with not a lot of plot beats, just pure gameplay, until the prince gives us a summary of what's happened so far.
Once more the wheels of suffering are set in motion by my hand. In taking Kaileena from the Island of Time, I've changed the course of history. Without the Sands of Time, I never journeyed to Azad, never killed the Vizier. Now he lives again, driven by the same mad desire. I promised no harm would come to her.
The prince has no other course but to push forward. Deeper into the palace, we're pushed further from the Vizier as our arm begins to wig out and we fall deep into the sewers. Maybe due to our exposure to the sands before, or the Empress, or just plain plot armor, for whatever reason, we're more resilient to the Sands of Time. Instead of being turned completely, we hear a disembodied voice that seems to be guiding us through the sewers.
Wake up! The way behind you is gone, so you will have to find another exit from these sewers. Be quick about it. Start moving.
This whole area is pretty cool with how large it is and all of the water features about. There's even these pit-dwelling sand creatures that seem to not like light at all. You can lure them into light to make them weaker. About halfway through the sewers, things seem to switch up slightly. We're not entirely immune to the Sands of Time as we turn to some sort of sand monster human hybrid. with a massive DPS boost from the fact we can use the chain that was wrapped around us to attack with. We can also swing off poles and hangings, and it gives us an excitingly range of attacks and movement options. It functions similarly to the Dark Wraith form in Warrior Within, with our health draining constantly, and we can replenish this with sand instead of water. The Prince and his Dark Passenger talk a little bit, referring to himself as the Prince's untapped potential and his unreached dreams. As we advance through, we learn if we enter water, it'll actually revert us back to normal, so it's not a permanent transformation. Something the Dark Passenger admits to trying to hide. He's with us for the rest of the game now and comments on everything we do, from combat to interactions with other characters, and he's a hoot.
It's gone now. Water seems to fight this corruption. Why did you hide this from me?
What? And ruin all the fun?
We managed to crawl out of the sewers through some rocky side cliffs, having to deal with Vizier goons hunting us down at the same time. Kaileena gives her perspective on the whole split personality thing, and her hopes is that the Prince can change his ways.
When the prince was struck by the sands of time, something was woken within. Something strange and cunning. Something dark. The 7 years spent on the run had embittered the prince and made him hard. This burden sustained his other half, gave it strength. The prince was tempted to do as it said, for it was a light in the darkness, offering comfort and guidance to a man who had just lost everything. But what were its intentions? Why did it help him? Only time will tell.
She does mention she's not sure of the voice's intentions, and anything from the sands is likely to be a bit shady. Outside, we get our first look at the Vizier's new form. He's using these sand gates to travel around the city. They're just like portals, really. He's had a facelift and is being referred to as Zervan, the god of time. I'm sure that won't spell any difficulty for us, having to fight against the god of time. The prince's plan is to follow Zervan through the sand gate, and these things crop up now from time to time, with elite enemies guarding them. If we take out all the enemies, we can interact with them and boost our own sand abilities, from new sand tanks to new powers. We can't travel through the gates, however, so our plan is to get aboard some more traditional transport. Now throughout this, we hear the cries of citizens in need, but the prince is so dead set on going after Zervan, we're forced to ignore them, just as he's doing. Advancing forward, turn into the Dark Prince again, fight your way down into what appears to be some gates at the outskirts of the city, and we've seemingly drifted quite far away from the palace in the sewers. We get to see our first on-rail section, and our first glimpse at an old friend.
The Prince! Stop him!
And so once more the prince began the journey home, his mind of fire.
I recognise that foot.
Just as he would
But for now, we need to ride this chariot through the mean streets of Babylon while Shadow Prince tries to direct us. He's also a sassy guy and negs us on throughout. We actually make quite substantial gains in our journey towards Zervan's tower, and a rather climactic finish to our first cart section. They really hammer home his need for revenge, and the story in this game, while still quite supernatural, is more grounded in its character arcs this time. On that note, the Prince and the Dark Prince begin to argue as we climb into the city
once
proper.
bright and vibrant.
I'm impressed.
Oh, good. Your opinion means a great deal to me.
Is that how you thank the man who just saved your life?
First, you did not save my life. I did. Second, you are not a man. Just a disembodied voice. A ghost. And third, I never asked for your help, and I certainly do not need it.
While I admire your bravado, you would be wise to show some respect.
And you would be wise to keep quiet. You are distracting me and we are no longer alone.
Climbing into the city proper, we can see an example of sand monsters talking, and they're herding living humans for something. Even a few grumble about guard duty, suggesting they're not as brainless as we've seen in previous titles. There's a few more stealth sections about much to comment on until the dogs appear. These sandhounds will steal sands of time from us at range. They're a bit annoying but fairly easy to deal with. We flip-flop a bit between the Prince and the Dark Prince, as both seem to be very anxious to get to the Vizier as soon as possible. Once we get onto the rooftops above the city, we encounter a hidden archer who seems to be helping us.
is this? Someone helping us. Who is there? You have done me a great service.
The whole picture seems to be coming together really as we advance on, heading down to street level and herding onwards towards the living people.
This thing was once a man. He was there when Kaileena died.
One of Zervan's generals, the first boss. This guy was present in Kaileena's cutscene, but he's put on a bit of timber since then. The boss fight in the arena has a few stages to it. Firstly, we need to blind this guy because if we're getting close, he's just going to fuck us up. There's some areas of the environment we can run up while he attacks us, and they'll lead to some speed kill spots where we can do the cinematic climb all over him and try and blind him. It doesn't really do much in terms of his overall health bar, but getting rid of both his eyes lets us attack him properly. He's got this weird lion growling thing going on, and as a set piece, the arena in general is quite impressive. When he's blind, we need to slash at his ankles to the point where he'll fall all over us. He's got these wide sweeping attacks, but if you maintain the giant circumcision position, you should be fine. When he falls over, you get one last speed kill attack on him, before we hit a big cutscene fleeing into the underground to stop the populace seeing what has become of their prince. The game continues to mix up its environmental sections, introducing various traps throughout, and this section brings these big wall smashing column things and some ledges that retract themselves. Kaileena again does a good job of summarising the prince's recent actions. Some of the acrobatics of the Dark Prince are really cool too, and I feel bad for skipping through all this, but we've got another cutscene as we switch places.
Well, look at that.
Farah!
How do you know my name?
Yes,
I eagerly await your response.
I have heard tales, wondrous tales of a beautiful and brave princess of India. One who has traveled to Babylon seeking to punish an evil vizier who has caused her great distress.
See? Now she's going to kill us.
How in the world have you managed to survive this long? Good luck, stranger.
The prince's way with words hasn't improved over the last two games, as we've reintroduced to Farah, the Indian princess who accompanied us in our first game, and she's an accomplished archer. We spend these next sections running through and doing some pretty heavy combat against mooks. One of the fun things you can do on the roofs is just throw enemies to their deaths if you want to cheese them. When we catch back up with Farah, she's a bit surprised we have the Dagger of Time. We manage to convince her to journey with us, with the Dark Prince throwing shade the whole time. We get the usual running around split between acrobatics and combat, and this time Farah's assisting us. We're almost tugged away from our revenge plot ever so gently, but not entirely. The Prince and Farah spend quite a lot of time making their way across the Gardens of Babylon. A lot of "I'll pull a switch for you if you shoot an arrow at a lever for me" type of stuff. The two manage to bond somewhat, with the Prince keeping his Sigma edge.
Do you think you could move a little faster?
You're more than welcome to come down here and try it yourself. 7 years and still nothing's changed.
7 years? What are you talking about?
It's a figure of speech.
There is something very odd about you.
She has no idea. Can help.
They both split when Farah hears some people in trouble, and the Dark Prince tells us to go after Zervan instead, clearly more concerned with the carnal act of revenge than saving his own people. Kaileena does a good job of narrating as she plants the seeds of romance.
And so the prince and Farah separated. She sought to save lives, he to end them. For the prince intended to confront his enemy, and perhaps utilize the powerful warriors who had holed up inside the temple. His mind churned with thoughts of glorious vengeance. But something new as well. Descending into the depths, his thoughts kept returning to Farah. He wondered if she was thinking of him as well.
Going down into the temple, we see Zervan attack a warrior here, really offending the prince. It seems like from this cutscene, the more the prince lets go, the more control the sand version of him has, as we turn almost immediately after he gets angry. Climbing down from the top of the temple in pursuit of Zervan, this was also the point I got my first life upgrade. Basically, when you get past the Dark Prince section, there's a little area you can climb up to a magical fountain. It's a little hidden, but easy enough to find. Now, to get this upgrade, you actually have to lock your frame rate to 50, or the acrobatics just fuck up, like this. There's no weird magic areas this time, just hallucinations as we wake up in the same spot with more health, ready to continue chasing Zervan. He actually escapes us as we leave the temple, but we do see Farah again.
Are you all right?
He has escaped. And you? What of the troops?
Dead. All dead. But I saw the Vizier, or whatever it is he's become. He flew towards the palace.
Then we know where to go.
All right. But I seem to be, well, stuck. Could you find a way to open this door?
I understand the principles of courtesy, but I think you take things a bit too far.
Dark Prince is a bit miffed we're getting distracted with Farah rather than actually completing our mission. Though, through a bit of bobbing and weaving, we can get her out, and she can get us unstuck too. Dark Prince sounds like he's from Fresh and Fit in this scene.
The problem is, now I am trapped.
Just like a woman. Solving her problem creates a new one for you.
Allow me to return the favor.
We call him out for being jealous as we advance towards the palace, and things don't really pick up again
You
until we
sound
get to the
upset.
palace.
Are you jealous?
Just focus on getting to the palace.
We're given a bit of a moral crossroad.
Have you forgotten what he did to you?
Again, the Dark Prince is getting a bit Sigma. We decide to press on, and in the last second, our love for her carries our conscience as we head down to find her, instead of chasing our goal.
Not to blame. Do not let it cloud your judgment.
It is not I who suffers from clouded judgment. You may choose not to help them, but you cannot stop me.
I go to kill the Vizier, to end this, while you run about applying bandages to axe wounds.
Good riddance. She has been nothing but a distraction, always getting into trouble and slowing us down. Finally, we can... What?
Something could happen to her. I cannot lose her again.
No, no, no! You're so close!
Farah's the first time in this game the Prince has thought of other people's needs, showing the start of his character development. I really do enjoy the character writing in this game specifically. I think the gameplay's solid and consistent, but the characters really make the game engaging. We fight our way into the brothels of the palace as the Dark Prince goads us about our choice of actions. He makes a really good balance to the Prince's own morals. There's sexy concubine enemies here too, but they have this weird gimmick of their attacks being hard to judge and they just swing randomly. It takes us a while to get to Farah again, and we have another conversation about our change of heart.
Farah!
What do you want?
I have thought about what you said, and you are right.
There's another general and a new boss fight. The gimmick here is just running to her corner of the arena and slowing down time, otherwise she just dukes past you. About halfway through the fight, things get spicy as the Dark Prince comes out to play. All there really is to do is again just swing around, slow down time and hit the boss. I found it quite a dull fight overall, there wasn't really much to it. And when we get round to doing the death blow, she begins to taunt us and we send her flying.
You waste your time. The Vizier has already begun to transform the women I've imprisoned. You buy yourself powers at best.
If I had some sands for every time someone said that to me. Oh, I do.
I love this little meta joke as well about the sands. Farah sees our new face, and well, that puts a strain on any relationship. With Farah sending us away, Kaileena narrates that maybe the prince should have been up front, but I don't really agree with her. And there's nothing left now but to go to the palace. We fight through a few locales, including some more slums, the palace gardens, and I'm glossing over this as it's really more of the same stuff, just in different orders. We do encounter one of the golem enemies from the last game, just with a bit of a facelift. You fight it in the exact same way, except this time when you beat it, you get to ride it out into the gardens. And if you fuck up and bash into the walls too much, there's a bit of a funny death scene too. And the comedy in this game is subtle but ever present for the most part. Get through and we can advance further towards our goal. One thing I think I struggled with in this game is having an idea about where I was. The save points all have names, but only in a few areas does the level design really nail a location. It's all just generic Babylon for the most part. Advancing is fairly light on plot points for now, until we reach a burning building with people trapped inside. Dark Prince calls it a trap, but we try our best to give it the benefit of the doubt. His reasoning is pretty fair though. Getting in, it's fairly evident it was a trap. We actually have to use a statue of our father to bust the building open. I remember really struggling with it as a kid, but it's actually a really simple puzzle. I don't know why I did. There's 2 levers, one turns the statue, one moves it forward or back, and you just got to shimmy it through the place without hitting any scaffolding. Not a whole lot of it, but it's a funnish puzzle. It distracts you. Cracking open the door gives us one of those beautiful pre-rendered cutscenes, and a cameo from a wise man we saw at the start of Warrior Within. The people are set upon by an axe-wielding man in a chariot, and so it's up to us to chase him down on another slightly more exciting cart section. No complaints here as we're bobbing and weaving, smashing guards against the scenery, and avoiding danger. It's pretty fun as far as sections go. When we get to smash the axe wielder, instead of just riding into him, the prince goes full Goldberg and he slams him through an open wall. What happens to be a twin warrior coming through with him.
All right, I will admit, I was not expecting that.
I thought this boss was one of the hardest in the game. Your main enemy is the game's camera and lock-on controls. The whole idea is to attack the sword wielder, the axeman will jump at you, you dodge and you punish him. But as you're doing this, your rolling's a bit inconsistent and the sword wielder likes to go full aggro when you hit his partner, and so you're going to take some hits here and there. Eventually, when you take one down, the other comes for you and is dispatched by Farah. She's seemingly more positive about us after we save all those people.
It seems I chose the right moment to return.
Thank you.
There's yet another cutscene. We're surrounded by Zervan's army, and the people of the city have come to save us in heroic fashion. They know they can't kill the sand monsters, but they can slow them down while we go for the vizier. With that unfolding, we manage to run to the palace, and the third act begins as we're separated from Farah. We start with a big combat section as the prince, with seemingly a never-ending amount of enemies getting dropped down after us. Probably stragglers from the fight outside. Combat as the Dark Prince is very easy, with your chain letting you hit multiple enemies at once for quite high damage. You can just spam the same move over and over. Dispatch enough of them and the doors open further into the palace, allowing us to get deeper. The palace is a very ornate place with all these large rooms and beautiful ceramics dotted about. We next encounter Farah as we venture further in, seeing what appears to be an elevator. We need to dash about, raising the whole thing with Farah inside it. It's more of the usual acrobatics, but I remember it being one of the most fun sections in the game for me. Something about the feedback loop of making the lift go up as I climbed it too itched my OCD brain. I don't know what it was. There's various bits of combat as we climb up, but really the juicy stuff is outside of combat, where the prince apologises to Farah for his rough emotional state, and she also apologises. Dark Prince just doesn't care about any of the emotional stuff, and his little jabs here and there are very entertaining. When we actually enter the elevator, we get the game attempting small talk between Farah and the prince, and a rather human component of the dialogue is a bit refreshing. The two, in the middle of all the chaos, have a bit of chatter about some rather inconsequential things, and it's quite funny for their two characters.
What is your favorite color?
Color?
Shall I repeat the question?
Blue.
Blue? That's not my favorite color.
What is the point of this?
Must every conversation we have be so serious? I know so little about you.
Very well. Then, what is your favorite food?
The pomegranate, of course.
I do not like pomegranates.
What is wrong with you?
They are messy, impossible to eat with dignity. So much work for a few seeds.
But is it not the effort that makes them that much sweeter?
I think I'm going to be sick.
What is
We end up inside the Hanging Gardens of Babylon themselves, one of the wonders of the ancient world. They're huge too. We feel like we're in a Lara Croft territory. There's even more chat between the two characters as the prince glazes his father. The prince has a weird relationship with Daddy, and being as he's watched his death and resurrection a few times throughout the series, the prince still hopes for one more chance to apologise to him. Further into the gardens, the slowdown power becomes pretty much compulsory for a lot of the trapped areas now, as they step up the intensity too. The climb out of the gardens results in Zervan diddying Farah. He's going to make Farah into his queen if we can't stop him, and as we go to stop him, we get thrown into the dungeons, a weirdly compulsory act in the Prince of Persia games. This time, our powers of the Dark Prince actually save us as we begin a rather ropey climb out.
A pit of darkness, robbed of Farah, distanced from the Vizier. He had been warned that his journey would not end well. Ah, but do not be surprised. The prince's transformation saved him. Sometimes good can come of ill. Sometimes.
The two spend the whole climb arguing about each other. The prince has finally clocked that the mysterious voice in his head probably wasn't a good person. Both seem to be vying for control of the body here. The way out is very time sensitive, and if you don't have all the health upgrades by this point, you're going to have a rough time, as this section seems balanced for them. The Dark Prince taunting us as our hourglass ticks down.
Tick-tock, Prince. Tick-tock. Feeling thirsty. Feeling dry. Oh, am I distracting you?
The well, the dungeon, whatever you want to call it, was memorable, but god did I wish I had a few more minutes of my health time before it. It was a really rough section. I died many times during. Oh, and the prince does get his wish to see his father again.
Father's sword? But what is it doing here?
Oh, come on now. Did you really expect to find him alive? Even after everything you have experienced, still you hold out hope.
Oh, Father. What have I done?
What now, then? Gather up enough sand, perform another grand rewind? Or perhaps you can return to the island and travel back to a time when he might still be saved. Maybe rescue a damsel in distress along the way.
No! You are right. I have been like a child. Naive and arrogant, always rushing to undo my mistakes, never facing the consequences of my actions. No more. I accept what I have done, and all that it implies.
What is this? You have no water? How did you...
You hold no power over me now. Begone. Retreat to whatever dark hole spawned you, and do not trouble me again.
Our father's sword seems to help us recover from the effects of the sands. It also lets us smash through weakened walls and one-hits any of the sand creatures, so it's definitely a bit of a buff. Each of the games had their wall-smashing swords, but this one combines the effects of them all and marks our entry into the last section of the big tower climb. We begin our ascent out of the dungeons, into Zervan's tower that we've seen in the background of a lot of the open outdoor sections polluting the skyline. There's a lot I'm going to gloss over here. It's the peak of gameplay and environmental design, with all the strong enemies and the hard traps and climbs. Not a whole lot happens of plot significance besides us arguing with our dark passenger throughout various different locales. I'm going to let these flash behind us in the video. Ancient Tower bottom, Ancient Tower middle, and Ancient Tower top. There's some of these cool outside sections where we climb and have some pretty big jumps to land too. This is probably a good time to comment on the levels previous to it. The game unknowingly to the player actually splits itself into 5 chapters, one being the arrival and before we get our dark passenger, all of the streets, the royal chambers, and it's a good introductory section to the game. Combat was hard, climbing was fun. Chapter 2 was the sewer section, that first boss in the arena. Again, introduction to the Dark Prince, real fun time. And that first boss was unexpected in this sort of game, so far so good. Chapter 3 brought us closer to Farah, the temple and the brothel, but was a bit of a plateau in terms of gameplay. Not a whole lot changes, and the big thing here was the character development and dialogue. Chapter 4 was really more of the same, up to the burning workshop and the chariot section, and again, still on a plateau. The boss fight didn't really save it either for me. Chapter 5 consists of everything after that, and it really shines with the gameplay, the story all flowing as this fast-paced, narratively rich, tense combo. The sections we've not hit yet are actually all quite fun, and overall I think it makes the game a bit of a sandwich of good, good, bad, bad, good. So I've got no real complaints. When we reach near the top of the tower, we actually have to lock our frame rate to 30 FPS this time, otherwise the climbing stops working in one of the most annoying ways. It's all during this section called the tower middle and its aids. I've got a bit of a montage here where the game bugged out for me, and honestly this level is one of my only real complaints. I got stuck on the geometry, one of the shutters didn't work properly unless you lock your frame rate. Worst part is, if you die on the shutter bit, you go to the start of the level just before your next checkpoint. And it's a good thing I'm playing this now while there's guides online, otherwise I would have had to cut my video here and just call it a day. It's very annoying for the casual player. Once you're out of the tower, we get to the big climax against Zurvan himself. There's this slow elevator up to the final section, and then this good cutscene as we're about to stop the man himself.
Now where did I put those boots?
Zurvan,
What is it?
in case I don't get the chance again.
You impudent pig! I offer you life eternal, and this is how you respond? Oh, I shall enjoy changing you. Hello, Prince. Not quite the homecoming you expected.
Zurvan is a boss fight that matured for me over time. As a kid I hated it, but with time came to understand it. He's got these big sweeping attacks that you can roll out of. No other enemy really made you do this, and so you've got to just figure it out. Slap him and then roll. The Prince and Zurvan both argue during the fight, and both seem to make good points, weirdly enough. Zurvan wants, power so that he can establish this great kingdom, and the Prince says, at what cost? Through the fight, Zurvan has all these energy attacks, and then the second phase involves the Prince running up walls and doing speed kill attacks on him to take him apart piece by piece. For an immortal creature, he's not exactly invulnerable to the dagger. Do it enough times and he flies up to the top of the arena. You have a little climbing section to finish him off, and I love it. It combines all the gameplay with experience leading up to the fight. It's a perfect end boss for this game, and it makes you use everything you've become accustomed to. It really crystallizes down on all the mechanics of the combat and the climbing into one event.
This is not what the dagger promised!
We slap him down, and we actually have a second fight right after. The Dark Prince himself taunting us. Now he doesn't attack at all, just making us chase him through all these trippy magical mind areas, taunting us and trying to attack our motivations and our character. There's all these trippy jumps between platforms where we're transported into areas from the past games, the Prince's memories, magical fountain rooms from Sands of Time, the ship from Warrior Within, and throughout this the Shadow reams us too for our inability to achieve his goals.
Who, Prince?
Your words are empty, have always been empty. You are just a desperate, selfish spirit.
If I am selfish, Prince, it is because you are. If I am ruthless and reckless and lacking in morals, it is because you are. I did not spin myself out of the ether. I was not conjured by some mad vizier. I am you.
No, I have seen the error of my ways, and I have atoned for the transgressions.
He's a shadow, he can't attack us, just lash out at us for our own actions. The secret to beating him is very thematic, and it's just letting him go. Farah encourages us to abandon the fight and let the shadow fade, on his own. He's a personality trait we can drop on its ass, and leaving him to fight alone in your mind expunges you from him. He feeds off the Prince's anger and his rage, and when that's gone, he's got nothing to eat. With his death comes the final cutscene.
How did you really know my name?
Most people think time is like a river that flows swift and...
Farah's confused how we first knew her name, and in response, quoting the opening of the first game, we begin to tell her the story, starting with Sands of Time, making the game series a perfect loop. If you picked up Sands of Time now, at this moment, you'd be following on from his narration, and it's just a perfect ending to the series. With that in mind, what did I think of it? Conclusion time, baby. The game is the crown jewel of the Sands of Time trilogy, with exceptionally fun gameplay and a story that takes a lot of inspiration and combination from the last two titles before it. It feels like some ancient epic. The Prince as a character is still quite edgy from Warrior Within, but manages to turn things around during his character arc, despite the introduction of a character derived from his darkest wants and desires. The balance between normal Prince and Dark Prince, both thematically and gameplay wise, is very well done. Dark Prince sections felt like little dessert chapters due to the speed and combat capability they gave you. There's no backtracking in this game, and it's one narrative shot forward from start to end. The gameplay is probably the peak for the series. It combines all the best bits from the previous two titles. The story wasn't exactly as good as Sands of Time for me, but I did enjoy the variety of characters and the fact they wrote in the other games without much, if any, noticeable continuity error. Replayability isn't that high, but it's not that sort of game, neither were the past ones. It's a narrative experience and I enjoyed it a lot. Bug-wise, the PC port contained a few of those, and they tended to be run-stopping for me at points, having to adjust settings before continuing, which just knocks a point off for sure. It was annoying, but dealable. You can play this game without playing the last two, but I wouldn't recommend it. Giving them a go first gets you the full story and introduces you to characters, so you don't really miss anything. I'd give it an 8 out of 10, just like the last. A slightly scuffed but overall great game with a good story, an okay variety in levels, but some really, really good gameplay. Over and out, Smooth Brains.
We did not part on the best of terms. It was many years ago. I was young and full of pride, full of fear as well. He offered to listen, but I could not find the words, would not find